Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. As always, I'm your host, Simon. Welcome to the show. This is someone whose pronunciation of the name I definitely had to look up, and I'm still going to screw it up, but I believe it's Aafia Siddiqui. I watched a video on YouTube, and the person presenting it seemed very confident in their pronunciation of the name. So let's go with it. Unrepentant terrorist or victim of injustice? Thank you, Kevin, for putting it together. I guess we're about to find out. I mean, maybe. We don't often actually end up decoding things here. But it's nice to have an episode that's not about ghosts for once. Oh, by the way, if you're new here, the format of the show is Kevin writes it, I read it. Never read it before. We're going to explore it together, dear viewer or listener. Or maybe both. I guess if you're viewing, you would be listening. Unless you're deaf. In which case, welcome to our deaf friends. I hope the subtitles are good. There are certain events throughout history that everyone remembers exactly where they were when they happened. If you're old enough, it may have been the JFK assassination or the first moon landing. Jesus. Yeah, maybe my boomer parents. But for the majority of Americans watching this, the likely event that came to mind was the terrorist attack on 9/11. Yeah, even for non-Americans. I remember I was in detention. I've brought this up before. I was in detention, and the teacher who was monitoring detention, he was running detention, was just messing around on the computer, and he was like, guys, you might want to come take a look at this. And it was like before you had like streaming video on computers, so it was just photos, and we're like, oh, holy shit. However, while researching this script, I came to a horrifying realization. There are people living in the United States right now who are old enough to vote and to drink and who weren't alive when it happened. Yeah, dude, by like 4 years. I'm not saying it's horrifying that they didn't have to live through such a monumental tragedy, but it's horrifying how old that means the rest of us are getting. It won't be long now before Simon and I are just old men yelling at clouds. Oh, Kevin, I'm there already. I've been an old man for the last 15 years. I think I got to 25. How old am I? 38? Got to 23 and I was like, nah, I'm old now. I'm just going to embrace it. Where are those clouds that need yelling at? That said, it's really hard to overstate just how significant an event 9/11 was. For many Americans, it was the first time they felt genuine concern that the ocean separating us from most of the world's population may no longer be enough to keep us safe on US soil. I mean, sure, there was that whole Cold War thing, but I think that deep down, most people didn't think that either the US or Russia was actually crazy enough to start a full-scale nuclear war. Wait, I thought people were afraid. I thought that was a whole thing, that people were really afraid that this was going to kick off and everyone was going to die. I feel like I'm still a little bit afraid of that. Have you ever tried Googling yourself? You found your name, your city, your state? Odds are that your personal data is floating around on sites that you've never heard of. Which is a bit rubbish, isn't it? You didn't put it out there, but it's there. Someone sold it, someone bought it, someone traded it, someone's looking to buy it to sell you shit that you don't need. But that is where our friends and sponsor of today's episode, Incogni, come in. It is a service that sends data removal requests to over 250 data brokers on your behalf, all automatically. Also, now, with their new unlimited plan, you can go a step further. If you find a site that's exposing your info, say a people search site or a business registry, boom, you submit that link in your dashboard on Incogni, and their team of privacy specialists will try to get it taken down for you. There's no scripts, no emails, you just paste the link and then you wait. And look, it's not perfect. Be straight up with you. Some sites, like government records or some social media, they're not going to be able to scrub it clean. Government's not going to like that. But for everything else, all of the sketchy ones, this feature is absolutely fantastic. You can take back your personal data with Incogni, use the code UNKNOWN. It's kind of funny, isn't it? To become unknown, yes please, at incogni.com/unknown, and you'll get 60% off an annual plan. Fantastic. And now back to today's episode. The Cuban Missile Crisis undoubtedly would have been a frightening time in the US, though unfortunately not old enough to have first-hand knowledge of that whole thing, but just as scary as it was, surely cooler heads were going to prevail. I mean, maybe, but it was awful close. Like, there have been some seriously close calls to all-out nuclear destruction, and I'm sure there have been some since that we just don't know about because they keep them classified because, well, holy shit. My hand really hurts. It's distracting me. I went to the doctor this morning and I had like a little bump on my hand. And you know when you've got something that doesn't heal? And it's like, look, if you've got some wound that doesn't heal, you should go to the doctor. And I was like, it's been like 6 months. And I'm like, all right, I got to go to the doctor. And they're like, oh, that's a little bit weird. Let's just freeze it off. And then they were like, oh, look at that one as well. Let's freeze that off. I'm like, why? And now my hand's been like frozen. It was like 20 minutes ago. It really hurts. I'm such a complainer. Oh, it's quite distracting.
Stop crying. It won't do any good. And anyway, you have a lot of work to do, starting right now.
The whole mutual part of mutually assured destruction meant that neither side was actually incentivized to launch a nuclear strike, so for the decades-long Cold War, it remains a largely abstract fear. I don't know, Kevin. I'd be interested to hear the opinion of people who are actually living through that. But this was something different. It was an attack against America on US soil, one that claimed the lives of almost 3,000 civilians. Didn't it tick over 3,000? With the deaths since, related diseases and such things from the dust and all of that. This created a massive cultural shift, fueled by nationalism and anti-Muslim sentiment reaching an all-time high. According to data from the FBI, there were 28 reported hate crimes against Muslims in 2000. In 2001, that number shot up to 481. And you can rest assured that almost all of them took place in the last 4 months of the year. You bet your ass they did. This is insane. I know people are, it's just like, people get crazy, and I'm sorry, I'm not making excuses for them. But it would be like saying, I don't know, like, oh yeah, no. Let's go out and abuse Christians because the KKK's a thing. It's like, well, that's the most extreme part of an otherwise fairly peaceful religion. And it's the same for terrorists. It's a small part of a largely peaceful religion. Can we just leave it alone? This continued in the years that followed, with bounties being placed on anyone who was believed to have been involved in the 9/11 attack. In 2003, when the United States and its coalition of the willing invaded Iraq, the US Defense Intelligence Agency revealed that they had designed and commissioned a deck of Iraq's most wanted playing cards featuring the names, jobs, and faces of 52 of the most wanted people in Iraq on the cards to help soldiers remember all the people they were after. Wait, that was actually the government that made that? Holy shit. I mean, I think a friend of mine had a pack of those cards when we were at school, and it had all the terrorists on them. I don't know why he had that, but we did play cards with the terrorist deck. Wow, that really entered the zeitgeist. I was actually thinking the other day it'd be really cool to have, I don't know if that's quite the right word, but to have the mugshots of all the horrible people that we've covered on Casual Criminalist on a deck of cards. I thought that'd be really cool. And then I looked into getting that made, and it was really complicated, and I don't know if I could be bothered. This is completely the wrong channel because this isn't the Casual Criminalist. But you guys want that? I can, if people really want that, I can actually make the effort to get that done. And I guess, there's going to be mugshots, so those will be public domain. I could probably do that. Or maybe I could get them all drawn as cartoons or some shit. That could be fun. Let me know. Or maybe don't. I don't know if I can be bothered. Shortly after this announcement, the World Without Criminals organization released a similar deck of cards featuring the names, faces, criminal allegations, and monetary bounties being offered by the FBI for 52 suspected al-Qaeda terrorists. It was certainly a weird chapter of history, but the people the FBI placed bounties on were supposed to be the worst of the worst. Among the people caught up in all this anti-Muslim hysteria was Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, a Pakistani neuroscientist and MIT graduate who US Attorney General revealed as one of the 7 most wanted al-Qaeda fugitives. She's an MIT neuroscientist. I don't imagine she's much into terrorism. This gotta be a mistake, right? I mean, I'm not saying smart people aren't terrorists. Like the people who sit at the top of terrorists. I mean, they're running big organizations that pull off some crazy shit. They're not dumb. But this person doesn't strike me as terroristy. Let's see where this goes. Also, I don't think terroristy is a word. To the United States and its allies, she was known as Lady Al-Qaeda and the most wanted woman in the world. But on the other side of the world, she was known as the daughter of Pakistan, the victim of all victims, and prisoner 650. Wait, a couple of things. To the United States and its allies. Okay. Wait, for some reason I thought she was in the United States. But she's just an MIT graduate, so she went to MIT and then went back to Pakistan. Okay. They argue that she was secretly held captive and tortured for 5 years before being officially arrested and sentenced on bullshit charges. In essence, they contend that Aafia was the innocent victim of what is now a decades-long conspiracy to keep Aafia locked away forever. But which side is telling the truth? And why doesn't either version of events make total sense? Okay. Look, at first I'm like, I thought she was a neuroscientist at MIT, which isn't what was happening here. So that made me think, really? But now I'm like, maybe, I don't know. I'm back to I don't know. Let's carry on. The disappearance. It began with a prayer On March 1st, 2003, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, better known as KSM, was captured about 20 kilometers outside of Islamabad by Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI, possibly as part of a joint effort with the CIA. KSM was there to propaganda for al-Qaeda and was the architect of the 9/11 attacks by his own admission. Immediately after being captured, he was taken from one CIA black site to another for torture before being shipped off to Guantanamo in 2006. Do we have to say torture allegedly? Because it's like, no, it's not torture, it's enhanced interrogation. Who was that guy? Wasn't there some talk show host or something who was like, waterboarding ain't torture, it's just interrogation. And then they waterboarded him. He was like, I would be waterboarded. And then afterwards he was like, no, that's torture. That's torture, my bad. Early in his incarceration, possibly after the first bout of torture, KSM began praying. Good luck with this, Simon, but the name and opening line of his prayer was, oh my Lord, I'm going to get this wrong, I apologize. Allahumma inni as'aluka al-afia. It's a general prayer for health and well-being, but the last word there, Aafia, is where the Muslim name Aafia comes from. KSM's American captors mistook his prayer as him implicating Aafia Siddiqui as a co-conspirator and member of Al-Qaeda. Guys, how dumb can you be? Just get some... There's plenty of... I don't even think I need to say imagine. The vast majority of Muslims who speak Arabic living in America probably quite against terrorism. How about you get one of those and be like, what's he saying? What's he saying? Rather than be like, wait. If he finished the sentence with Aluka Bush, are they like, oh yeah, Bush? But George W? Get him! That's craziness. I know this sounds far-fetched, Simon, indeed it does, but Aafia was already on the FBI's radar for other reasons. As such, it's unlikely but not inconceivable that such a sequence of events could have transpired. Also, the only possible source for that story would be KSM himself, so it's plausible he did specifically name her, then told that story to make it sound like he wasn't ratting on people. Regardless, the FBI suddenly became interested, and they put out a worldwide alert that Aafia was wanted for questioning. A few days after this alert went out, Aafia got into a taxi with her 3 children and left her parents' house in Karachi, the capital of the Pakistani province of Sindh, to go visit her uncle in Islamabad. Is that what's a red notice? Is that like a red notice with Interpol? I saw that Ryan Reynolds movie. Then they just hunt people with red notices and stuff. It's like they're going to be arrested and brought to whichever country. I was recently got a letter from a law firm in Somalia who were upset with some video I made on war fronts, and they were like, you've broken the Somali penal code. And I'm like, yeah, probably. I mean, your penal code's extremely repressive against journalism and reportage, so I imagine I've broken it many times. Oh no, my glasses broke. They're not broken. The screw fell out this morning, and I can't find it, and I can't put it back in. So I've just kind of been wearing them like this. And just pop that back. There we go. That'll be fine. And they're like, we're going to elevate this to Interpol. And I'm like, guys, I don't think you know what Interpol is. Are you really lawyers or are you just pretending? Karachi to Islamabad is a solid 16 to 18 hour drive, so the taxi was only meant to take them to the airport, where they would then fly to Islamabad. But she never arrived at her uncle's house, and neither she nor her children would be heard from for the next 5 years, at least not by anyone in the public. What are you doing with their children? Leave the children alone. But in July, leave her alone. What are you doing this? Because some dude said something in a prayer? But in July of 2008, a press conference was held by British journalist Yvonne Ridley. Yvonne had been a writer for the Sunday Express back in 2001 when she was captured by the Taliban and held prisoner for 11 days. Fuck that. While she was in captivity, she vowed to read the Quran and study Islam if she was released, which she eventually was. She wound up converting to Islam, stating, "What everyone forgets is that Islam is perfect. People are not." Holy shit. Holy shit. You got Stockholm Syndrome the fuck out of. I find that statement concerning since no religion is objectively perfect, so it may speak to her objectivity and bias in this matter. Holy shit, Yvonne. You got Stockholmed. Fully hardcore. They got you to change your religion. You got captured by the fucking Taliban. They're the bad guys. From my perspective. And also the perspective of most people probably watching and listening to this video. Taliban, not great. Especially not for women, Yvonne.
It's not a racial thing. It's about opposites. See, I want the bad guy to be different than me so I know why I hate him. I hate people who are different than me.
Regardless, she had been investigating Guantanamo Bay and had somehow been allowed to film on location there for a documentary that she was making with filmmaker David Miller. The documentary also included interviews with former inmates of Guantanamo, some of whom had been held in other locations before being transferred there. One of those men had been secretly held in solitary confinement in Bagram Air Base, which was still controlled by the US at the time. According to this prisoner, the person in the cell next to him, officially identified as Prisoner 650, was Aafia. He never saw her, but the two were able to speak between their cells, and she identified herself as Aafia Siddiqui. There was already precedent for secret detentions like this as well. You bet there was. During the War on Terror, the US and Pakistan worked closely together, with Pakistan being officially declared a major non-NATO ally of the US in 2004. There have since been multiple attempts over the last 10 years to revoke that status. Whoa, that status still exists. Interesting. But the two nations were on really good terms at the time. So in early 2007, when the government of Pakistan released over 100 people who had been listed as missing but were actually being held in CIA ghost prisons, it created the possibility that there could be other supposedly missing people who were secretly being imprisoned as well. Look, I mean, I don't think it's controversial to say that the CIA is probably keeping people that they shouldn't be keeping. If you go by, like, the law of the Constitution or whatever. There's all these loopholes and shit. Like, Guantanamo exists. Like, CIA definitely keeps people without trial and stuff like that, allegedly. I said definitely there, but I meant allegedly. On July the 17th, less than 2 weeks after Yvonne's press conference, Aafia suddenly reappeared in the city of Ghazni, Afghanistan, where she was arrested for loitering and being generally suspicious. Oh, guess that's a crime in Afghanistan. Well, she's a woman, so accompanying her at the time was her son, Ahmed. Of course, Aafia... Oh, I'm sorry, this isn't Yvonne getting arrested. This was Yvonne's press conference. Of course, Aafia claimed that she didn't actually know whether or not the boy was her son at the time. Ahmed would have been 12 at this point, and Aafia hadn't seen him in 4 years. DNA testing later confirmed that it was her son, but allegedly she didn't know that when they were hanging around in Ghazni. On that day, Aafia had been released from Bagram, sent to Ghazni with her son, and told to wait there so that she could be reunited with her daughter, Mariam. However, they made her son wear a heavy jacket with pockets full of fruit, even though it was summer, so a jacket was unnecessary. What? Why? What is going on? I'm immediately thinking suicide vest. I don't know why. Why is there fruit in a jacket? What's going on? After waiting 7 hours, police were alerted to her presence. Not only had she been hanging around in one location for hours, her son was wearing what looked like could be a suicide vest. Oh, okay, so they wanted it just to look like that by stuffing it with... Really? Fruit? You couldn't do better than that? You couldn't just get some newspaper, roll it up, spray it red, stick some duct tape on it, strap it to your chest? I don't know. Also, why is the guy like, oh yeah, no, I'll wear the jacket filled with fruit. That's not weird at all. Could be good for snacking. Also, nobody was able to speak to Aafia as she only spoke English and Urdu, while the main languages in Afghanistan are Pashto and Dari. She was arrested, though at the time the police didn't know her identity. It was only after she was fingerprinted that she was identified as Aafia Siddiqui, and the next day, US authorities came to take her into custody. She was taken to a meeting room that had a curtain as a partition for some reason, and she was left behind the curtain without any restraints. All right. Eventually, 2 FBI agents. Well, that's definitely weird. What is the FBI doing in Afghanistan? As far as I understand it, FBI, federal. CIA, spying. CIA operates internationally and not on US soil. FBI operates on US soil but not internationally. Right? Look, I mean, I've seen enough spy movies. I've seen spy movies. I've seen, like, police procedurals with the FBI. I could still be entirely wrong. I apologize if I am. They were unaware that Aafia was standing behind the curtain and she didn't know who had just come into the room. According to a statement from Aafia, she looked around the curtain to see what was happening, at which point someone shouted, "She's loose," and shot her in the abdomen, causing her to pass out. Bro, this was a setup. She conveniently woke up just in time to hear one of the men saying, "We could lose our jobs," referring to their actions of shooting an unarmed prisoner. Yes, who they didn't restrain. It's not like she got loose. She was loose because you didn't restrain her. This is very much feels like a setup if this is what happened. In order to save their own asses, they instead constructed a story in which the warrant officer sat down and placed his M4 rifle on the ground by the curtain. Sounds likely. They claimed Aafia grabbed the gun and opened fire, yelling things like Allah Akbar and death to Americans. She only got off a couple of rounds which missed, at which point one of the interpreters tried to wrestle the gun away from her. While she was distracted, the warrant officer shot her in the abdomen with his 9mm pistol, at which point she was disarmed. People bought this. If this is actually how it went down and not just what she says, or not just what they say, or whatever, this is unbelievably bad as a cover-up. Aafia was then transferred to a hospital in Bagram to be treated. While in hospital, she was interrogated by the FBI for an average of 8 hours each day for 10 days. She was also charged with assault with a deadly weapon, 3 counts of assault on U.S. officers and employees, 2 counts of attempted murder, including an attempted to kill a U.S. Army captain while engaged in official duties, and that's an extraordinarily specific crime. On August 4th, 2008, she was extradited to the United States for trial. Now, we'll get to the trial part later, but Aafia's supporters found those charges to be highly suspicious. Part of the basis for detaining and questioning her following her arrest was a bag that she was carrying that was allegedly full of plans to make biological and chemical weapons, targets in New York City that could be used for a mass casualty attack, bottles of liquid and gels that could be used to make explosives or chemical weapons. Sounds like she can't make up her mind about what to do. However, none of that was included in trial. Despite allegedly carrying a bag that may as well have been labeled, "I am a terrorist," Aafia wasn't brought up on any charges related to terrorism. She was only charged for the assault that took place in the Ghazi police station. There also wasn't any forensics used in the trial, just eyewitness testimony because the forensic evidence, well, it didn't exist. The gun didn't have Aafia's prints on it, there was no gunshot residue on her hands, clothes, or the curtain, and there was no evidence that the gun was ever fired. Because it wasn't, guys. This is ridiculous. Now that's more than a bit unusual, isn't it? And it led to a lot of credence to Aafia's version of events in the eyes of Pakistanis. And I mean, so far in the eyes of this humble podcaster. It certainly didn't help that the only photo taken of her since 2003 showed the normally vibrant and smiling woman looking genuinely like she'd spent years being tortured. She's become a rallying point among protesters, with numerous efforts since 2009 to have her return to Pakistan, all of which have been unsuccessful. But this is the story as it's told in Pakistan. The story, okay, there we go. That's why I'm like, oh yeah, no, this is crazy. Because I'm only getting one side of the picture so far. The story of an innocent woman who was inexplicably railroaded by the US and incarcerated in a Texas prison, often referred to as the House of Horrors. However, I did mention that Aafia was already on the FBI's radar long before KSM may or may not have said a prayer that sounded like it contained her name. So what exactly had she been up to during her time in the US that drew the attention of the FBI? Very cynically, I'd be like, maybe she was just being a Muslim. The official story. Aafia was born on March 2nd, 1972 in Karachi. Her father was a neurosurgeon, and her mother was a teacher, social worker, and charity volunteer. Her sister described the family as being upper middle class, something which afforded them a lot of opportunities when it came to education. Her parents were devout Muslims, though they also heavily emphasized science and technology. Yeah, it'd be a bit weird if her dad's a brain surgeon and he's like, nah, but science is kind of optional. Her mother was also a member of Pakistan's parliament. Holy shit, okay. You didn't want to lead with that? She was a teacher, social worker, and charity volunteer. Also, member of parliament. I feel like that would be the first thing on my bio. And she fervently defended Islam fundamentalism in the face of opposition from uppity feminists. This caught the attention of family friend General Mohammed Zia-ul-Haq, who rewarded her with a position collecting and distributing Islamic taxes after he seized power as a military dictator. How is that a reward? It's like, no, I'm a member of parliament and I'm just having a good time, you know? I'm a teacher, a social worker, my husband's a brain surgeon. And it's like, wait, my reward is becoming the tax man? Fuck! Aafia was sent to Zambia for her early education, but she returned to Karachi at the age of 8 to finish her education through high school. In 1990, she traveled to Houston to begin her undergraduate degree at the University of Houston. Her older brother was already there studying architecture, though after 3 semesters, she moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts instead. It's hard to say exactly why she decided to make such a drastic change. But if I'd had to guess, it's probably because she was offered a full scholarship by MIT. But no shade to the University of Houston. I didn't go to a university that's as good as MIT, but I've heard of MIT. MIT is famously for smart people. University of Houston, could be an absolutely cracking school, but I've never heard of it. So if someone's like, do you want to come to MIT and not pay for it to do neuroscience? I think you'd be like, yes, please. Originally, she'd planned to earn a triple major like a show-off, but Aafia eventually settled on just getting her undergraduate degree in biology. And while she was at MIT, there were only two things that Aafia seemed to care about: studying and activism. She joined the Muslim Students Association, where some of the other members got her involved with the Al-Kafar Refugee Center. I'm unclear whether or not he had founded it, but Al-Kafar had certainly been controlled by Abdullah Azzam. Abdullah was the mentor of Osama bin Laden and the founder of Maktab al-Khidamat, the precursor to Al-Qaeda. But she's only involved in the refugee center. I'm sure that, look, bad people do good things. No one... Let's not say... Hitler was great for animals. He was a big believer in animal rights. It doesn't forgive everything else, but bad people can do good things, and it sounds like she's involved with the good thing that a bad person is doing. Al-Kafar was the American wing of MAC, and although he died a couple of years before Aafia joined the group, some of the members of the Muslim Students Association were said to still be under Abdullah's spell. Aafia became involved in the group, giving speeches, doing recruiting, and even fundraising. It was said that she was the only woman to ever fundraise for Al-Kafar, as the group was full of rampant misogyny. However, she used that to her benefit. She was quoted as saying things like, "Where are the Muslim men? Why do I have to be the one to get up here and talk?" encouraging the men to take a more active role in advancing Islam. Very clever. Very clever. Which isn't surprising. She's a neuroscientist who has a degree from MIT. But given its origins and what it turned into, it's not surprising that Al-Kafar was associated with violence as well. In 1990, a member from the organization's central headquarters in Brooklyn murdered the founder of the Jewish Defense League. And in 1993, when Aafia was active in the group, the Jersey City branch was tied to the bombing of the World Trade Center that killed 6 people. Oosh. This is not that's not a good look. Not only did the ties to violence fail to dissuade Aafia from her involvement in the group, she criticized the Pakistani government for extraditing someone connected to the bombing to the United States. Well, look. What? I mean, I don't think Pakistan wants to be How long was Osama bin Laden there? Look, this is a very complicated situation. She sent an email to the group condemning Pakistan's actions and ending with a quote from the Quran that warned Muslims against befriending Jews or Christians. All right then. Although none of her emails specifically advocated violence, her rhetoric still contained a very clear goal. In a guide she wrote for the Muslim Students Association, Aafia wrote that our humble effort continues and expands, and more people come to the religion of Allah until America becomes a Muslim land. Okay, beginning to see why you might be on the FBI's radar right now. And for good reason. Do I think you should be being watched by the FBI in this situation? I mean, if it's within the bounds of the law, absolutely yes. I think there's probably something, if you're not dangerous, you know dangerous people. In 1995, she finished her undergraduate degree at MIT, but before she graduated, she took a brief trip home to Karachi. While she was there, she caught the attention of the family of Amjad Mohammed Khan. He had just completed medical school, and the two had never met, but Aafia and Amjad's mothers arranged for the two to be married. I'm told that every little girl dreams of her wedding day and how perfect and romantic they want it to be. Afia's wedding was definitely not that, because she and Amjad weren't arranged to be married until she'd returned back to MIT. The wedding ceremony was conducted over the phone. The two had still never met at this point. Is that even legal? Really? Aafia had been accepted to Brandeis University to study for a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, so Amjad took a job at Brigham and Women's Hospital, part of Harvard Medical School. The fact that Afia's sister, Fawzia, was earning her PhD in neurophysiology from Harvard at the time may or may not have helped Amjad get the job. I've got no idea. I imagine he probably got the job on his own merits. This does seem to be a group of very smart people. Their son I mentioned earlier, Ahmed, was born in 1996, so that's about a year after they were married. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Mariam. By that point, they were living in the Mission Hill section of Roxbury so that Amjad could be closer to his work. Aafia was doing well in school, and she remained highly involved with her activism. Perhaps too involved. On paper, the marriage of Amjad and Aafia had made sense. They were both from wealthy enough families. He was a medical doctor and she was working towards being a neuroscientist. However, despite all of her preaching about how great Islam was for women and how feminism was kind of dumb, she didn't seem particularly interested in being a wife, at least not according to Amjad, who may or may not be a reliable narrator. Amjad felt that Aafia was too devoted to activism and jihad rather than to family, which caused trouble for their marriage. And there was also that time that she had to go to the emergency room to get stitches after he threw a baby bottle that hit her in the mouth. Bro. And according to Aafia's lawyer, her colleagues at Brandit, how fucking hard did you shouldn't be throwing shit at your wife, but how hard did you throw that bottle, dude? What the fuck? Stitches? What the fuck's wrong with you? So maybe Aafia was a neglectful wife and mother, or maybe Amjad was just a massive piece of shit. Gonna go with maybe the former, definitely the latter, Amjad, you piece of shit. If you're causing your wife to get stitches in anything other than, like, if you were throwing that bottle because your wife's face, or I'm really struggling to think. Maybe you were like, I'm going to throw it really hard across the room into the sink where I'm going to pick it up later and your wife just happens to put her face in the way. I mean, as insane as that sounds, I'd be like, well, obviously that's an accident. But anything beyond giving your wife stitches accidentally just kind of does classify you as a piece of shit by default. I mean, unless you're a surgeon and you're operating on your wife and then you have to stitch her up afterwards, then that's okay. You gave your wife stitches in an acceptable way. Let's move on from this. Regardless of the issues in their marriage, Aafia completed her PhD in 2001. However, once she had finished her degree, she told the faculty that she wanted to devote herself to family rather than a career. She spent the summer not only with her own children, but by essentially running a daycare for other neighborhood children in their apartment as well. Amjad spent that summer taking courses at Harvard School of Public Health. He was supposed to take classes in the fall semester as well, but the fall semester would have started in September, and this was 2001, so well, you know. Following the 9/11 attack, Aafia wanted to get the hell out of the US and go back to Pakistan immediately. I would say, as much as I don't want that to be the case, like for people to feel that way, although she is a little bit. She's into jihad and stuff. She said that she and the children were being harassed and threatened, which is absolutely plausible based on these statistics that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, and she felt that the family weren't safe there. Fair play. The only problem was that Amjad was expecting a bonus from the hospital in a few months, so he wanted to wait until at least he got the check before leaving. I mean, dude, they're not going to not give you the money. You're entitled to that. Just, I don't know, get them to mail it to you. Just have a mate mail it. It's not that hard. Also, I once did have an American sponsor. I can't remember who it was. There was a sponsor and they were like, okay, so we're going to mail you a check. And I'm like, dude, checks ain't a thing in Europe. And I was like, okay, I'll ask my bank. I phoned up my bank. I was like, can you cash a check in US dollars? And they're like, what is a check? I'm like, so I look around online and there's one bank. And I'm like, okay, cool. You say you can do checks on your website. I phone them up and they're like, oh no, that must be a really old page. We definitely don't do checks. We used to do it for like people like you who'd sometimes get a check from abroad, but that doesn't happen anymore. So we stopped offering that service. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. Eventually, I think we got a bank transfer done, but it was a fucking hassle. What are you doing with checks, America? It's 2025. Aafia refused to stay, instead demanding that she be allowed to go back to Karachi with the children and saying that he could join them in a few months. Sounds entirely reasonable. And that's ultimately what happened, because whatever Aafia wanted was always what happened in their marriage. While they were in Karachi, the US began its invasion of Afghanistan. Before the year was over, the Taliban was overthrown, and they and Al-Qaeda were kicked out of the country. It was a swift and decisive operation with absolutely no long-term repercussions whatsoever. So just don't go look up who controls Afghanistan now. It's not important, okay? Also, don't look up how much money was spent on this and how many people died on both sides. It's crazy. Anyway, with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban temporarily thwarted, many of their members fled to Karachi to regroup. Among them was KSM, who was looking for US citizens and visa holders who could move undetected throughout the United States to carry out new attacks. However, Aafia and Amjad's trip to Karachi did not last long. Amjad wasn't able to find suitable work, so he wanted to return to the hospital in the United States. For once, Aafia relented, and in January 2002, the couple moved back to Boston. But when they returned, the FBI was already looking into them. Aafia had strong ties to organizations that were responsible for terror attacks, and that had associations with Al-Qaeda. Many of her friends from Al-Kafar had already been questioned by the FBI about general concerns, but there was a much more specific concern that they had with regards to Aafia and Amjad. In December, Boston's Fleet Bank had noticed an unusual transaction in which $8,000 was transferred from the couple's account to Habib Bank in Pakistan. Seeing as they were living in Pakistan at the time, that's not necessarily unusual. It's the sort of thing that might automatically trip the bank's fraud detection or whatever. But looking into it and seeing that they were visiting family in Pakistan at the time makes it much less suspicious. Yeah, I've sometimes had this. Actually, my bigger one is like stuff going to spam. Like, you know, you'll often get those things and it's like, you've received $8,000 from Prince so-and-so. All you need to do is go here. The problem is, at least this used to happen before I had someone kind of managing my business for me. But I'd get we'd have sponsorship negotiations and stuff for, fairly large amounts of money. And it kept tripping the spam, it'd be because it's just large amounts of money being talked about in short emails or something that kept going to spam. And I'm like, stop it. But, massive first world problem. However, around that same time, someone using Aafia's email address and the couple's joint bank account ordered $10,000 worth of night vision goggles, body armor, and military manuals, including a manual on how to make C4. What you doing buying a manual on how to make C4 with money from your bank account? Are you an insane person? That's almost setup level suspicious. I wouldn't think that's the sort of thing you can legally purchase online, but I'm sure as fuck not going to Google it myself. Not without a VPN, and that brings us to today's sponsor, Surfshark. I don't know if Surfshark is sponsoring this video, but they're a great service.
Buy Surfshark for a safe VPN. If you don't have a VPN, we will find you.
So check them out. They probably wouldn't want me to associate them with this if this was a paid read. And I think I am doing this in jest. But if you did want to look something like this up out of curiosity, I don't think many people are listening to this being like, oh, I was thinking about making C4. Then a VPN. Use a VPN. Always use a VPN. If you just straight up, people must look this up all the time. I'd be curious. I'd probably Googled some crazy shit. Just Googling how to make C4 actually get you put on some sort of watch list. This episode has already been rough enough on my search history, thank you very much. The FBI didn't come to question the couple about the purchase until the spring of 2022. 20 years later, 2002. And allegedly their questions were mainly focused on Amjad, not Aafia. That claim came from a lawyer working for Aafia though, so I'm not sure how accurate it is. Seeing as she was the one who was far more involved in activism and was also the one whose email was used to purchase the equipment, I'd think she would be a larger focus. Right? They've already been... She must be on some sort of list already at this point, right? For all the activism and stuff and saying that she's going to turn America into a Muslim land and she's into jihad and stuff. You got to be on the list, right? Then again, it appears to have been another couple of years before people really talked about the potential inclusion of women in Islamic terrorism, so I guess it's possible she was only questioned as an afterthought. Regardless, the story Amjad gave was that he had purchased the equipment for use in big game hunting in Pakistan. Bro, wait, what was it again? $10,000 worth of night vision goggles, body armor, and military manuals, including how to make C4. What, so you need the body armor to protect you from deer or whatever you're hunting, and C4. You're hunting with bombs, are you? As that sort of equipment was illegal there. Why would night vision goggles and body armor be illegal? I understand why manuals on making C4 would be illegal. That's smart. But body armor and night vision goggles? Chill. Trophy hunting is big business in Pakistan, so that could theoretically explain the goggles and maybe the armor. Yeah, maybe, but also maybe not. I'm not convinced that C4 is particularly useful in hunting Himalayan ibex, though. After the visit from the FBI, they returned the items, and they also scheduled another interview with the FBI for a few weeks later. Oh yes, and later on, Amjad would retract the hunting story and claim he bought all that stuff to make Aafia happy. Which I believe. Speaking of things that would make Aafia happy, talking to the FBI again was not on that list, and also her father had fallen ill, which honestly may have been a larger motivating factor. She said she wanted to return to Pakistan before their scheduled appointment with the FBI, and Amjad agreed. They returned to Karachi in June of 2002, at which point Aafia was pregnant again, but Amjad would never see that child. The marriage had never really worked in the first place, and things were only getting worse with time instead of better. I mean, I don't want arranged marriages or whatever, but you never met. You got married over the phone. It's a bit weird. That summer, Amjad, from my cultural perspective, alright, I know. That summer, Amjad went to the bank to dispute a mysterious $2,000 withdrawal from their bank account, only to be informed that Aafia had come to the bank to take out the money. That was the last straw, and Amjad declared his intention to divorce her, claiming that she was abusive. and manipulative. Bro, you gave her stitches, right? Allegedly. He brought a letter to Aafia's parents explaining that he repudiated her and they would be divorced, which resulted in a shouting match between Amjad and Aafia's father, and then her father dropped dead of a heart attack. Holy sh! You killed him with anger. Okay, there probably was some amount of time between those two events, but it wasn't a lot as Aafia's father died in August of 2002. I thought the argument actually killed him. It's like, do you guys watch that Diplomat show on Netflix? The first season was absolutely cracking. I felt the second season was quite weak. But that last episode, I'm not going to spoil it, but like, holy shit. I'm not going to spoil it. It's too recent. And I realized that now it's going to be incredibly disappointing to people listening. Just go watch The Diplomat. It's a good show. The family blamed Amjad for his death. Wait, he was sick and shit. Come on. Chill. And they refused to speak to him or his family ever again. Amjad filed a lawsuit seeking visitation rights and the ability to pay child support, though as far as I can tell, this lawsuit was never resolved. That's pretty shitty. After the divorce, Aafia gave birth to a third child, a son she named Suleiman. Amjad never got to meet his other son, but Aafia felt that his attempts to remain in the children's lives were a form of harassment. Chill. She claimed staying in Pakistan and dealing with that would be too much for her, and that she wanted to go back to the US. And on Christmas Day that year, she did fly back, though not to Boston, where she spent most of her time in the US. Instead, she flew to Baltimore, where her sister Fauzia was now living and working. Fauzia said that Aafia visited both Johns Hopkins University and the State University of New York to interview for jobs, but this was more than a little suspicious. It was Christmas break, so both schools were closed during the 1 week in which Aafia was visiting. I mean, if she's just having a job interview, she's in this world. It's entirely possible that she's just meeting someone to sit down for coffee. Seeing as she had completed both her undergraduate degree and her doctorate in the US, you'd think that she would know that all of the schools shut down at Christmas. Yeah, but she'd also know that maybe her previous colleagues are around, like connections and stuff. However, following the March 1st arrest of KSM, a few different explanations for what happened have been presented. Aafia wasn't the only co-conspirator he had named. There was actually a bunch of them, many of whom were promptly arrested. Among them was a man named Majid Khan, who had been living in Baltimore. Majid had been given refugee status by the United States, but he left the country and had gone to Pakistan without getting the documentation that he would need to return. Allegedly, the real purpose of Aafia's visit to Baltimore was to open a P.O. box and list Majid as a co-owner. Alright, why? Another man named Uzair Paracha would then travel to Baltimore and impersonate Majid. Uzair was to use Majid's credit cards, put money in his bank account, and otherwise create a paper trail that would make it appear as though Majid was still living in the country. Okie dokie, so he's just swapping with him for some reason. What, did they look alike or something? He was also to call INS, I don't know what INS is, and put in a request. Did we mention INS? INS? And put in a request for the papers Majid would need in order to return to the US. So some sort of immigration department? Those papers would be mailed to the P.O. box Aafia had opened, and once they arrived, Uzair was meant to close the P.O. box. I'm a little bit confused. Papers Majid would need in order to return. Okay. That seems like an awful lot of trouble to get someone back in the country. So either they were really good friends, or this was all part of a nefarious plan. This is too complicated to be just what they're saying prima facie, right? In this case, Majid was tasked with detonating a bunch of underground gas tanks that were located around Baltimore. To facilitate this, Uzair's father created a fake import-export company that would be used to smuggle C4 into the US, hidden in 40-foot containers of textiles. KSM promised to invest $200,000 into the business in exchange for Uzair's help in getting Majid's papers for re-entry. $200,000 is enough to start to fund a business that can smuggle C4 in huge containers into the United States. Is it, I don't want to say is it that easy, but it's not like a lot of money for a big international terrorist organization. Fortunately, KSM and subsequently Majid were both arrested before they could follow through the plan. Well, there you go. It wasn't enough, was it? In February 2003, Aafia emailed her former dissertation advisor asking for help in finding a job in the US. Realistically, I would have thought that this email would have been a better first step in her job search than flying to go visit schools that were closed, but I don't have any experience getting hired through conventional means, so what the hell do I know? I don't actually remember how Kevin and I came to be in an employment relationship or a freelance relationship or whatever, but how? Maybe Kevin emailed me? Did I recruit Kevin? I'm sorry, Kevin, I don't remember. But I like working with you, and I guess that means we've been working together a long time, which is lovely. That same month, she also remarried, this time to Amar al-Baluchi, who just happened to be KSM's nephew. Her family disputes that this happened, with Fawzia claiming that Aafia could not have remarried under Islamic law because the day she disappeared was the final day of her iddah, or waiting period. There is a 3-month waiting period after divorce where a woman is not allowed to remarry, and if she is pregnant, then the iddah extends until she gives birth. That seems remarkably lenient for like, not just Islam, but religion in general. Aren't the Christians like, no, or Catholics, no divorces, right? That was the whole thing with what's-his-face? The king, Henry VIII. In the case of the husband's death, the iddah is 4 months and 10 days. It's very specific. Also very soon. Even if we were to use that longer period of time, Aafia's iddah still would have been before the end of February, since the date of the divorce being finalized is a matter of public record, thus making it easy to calculate when her iddah would have been over. Fawzia's comments claiming that Aafia was not yet eligible to marry certainly does call into question the veracity of any statements made by her or the rest of Aafia's family. Intelligence sources in both Pakistan and the United States confirmed that the marriage took place, and KSM's entire family confirmed it as well, but just like her previous marriage, this one was not going to last. Amjad found that Aafia was too devoted to jihad, but Amar thought she was too liberal. Wow. Both sides, huh? He was arrested in April 2003, at which point he divorced Aafia for her liberal way of life. But a liberal way of life. She's like the token woman who's saying like, men, why aren't you being more chauvinistic? But that brings us to March of 2003 and Aafia's sudden disappearance. As I addressed earlier, her family and the people of Pakistan contend that Aafia's taxi was stopped and she was arrested and taken to Bagram. As for the children, each supposedly suffered a very different fate. Ahmed was taken to a juvenile prison in Kabul, Afghanistan, where he remained until the day he and Aafia reappeared in Ghazni. He was then put into Fawzia's custody. As for and these people are young. Wasn't he born in like 96? As for Mariam, they claimed that she was taken to Afghanistan and forcibly adopted into a white Christian family by a guy named Josh and a woman named Natalie. And that's a quote, by the way, a guy named Josh and a woman named Natalie. Okay. That's a bit unusual. I don't imagine there's a ton of white Christian families in where was this? In Afghanistan. That seems like far too cruel and a bizarre thing to do to a 5-year-old girl. And if Mariam was living with a family for 5 years, I think she'd have more to identify them as some guy and some lady. Very, very strange. Very, very unusual, bordering on unbelievable story. However, her story didn't end when Aafia was arrested the same way that Ahmed's did. At the time, Mariam's whereabouts was still unknown. It wasn't until April 2010, almost 2 years after the arrest, that Mariam randomly appeared one day outside of Fawzia's house in Karachi. She had a tag around her neck with Fawzia's address, as if she'd been dropped off like a piece of lost luggage. This is extremely bizarre. According to Pakistan's Interior Minister, Rehman Malik, the girl was found outside the house and could only speak English and Dari, suggesting that she'd been living in Afghanistan. However, DNA testing to confirm she was Aafia's daughter was allegedly inconclusive. Baby Suleiman's story was by far the most tragic. Oh no. Wait, these are already pretty... She was given luggage tags. What's going on? According to Ahmed and Miriam, when they were being removed from the taxi, they saw one of the arresting officers drop Suleiman on his head. Some outlets describe it as an accident, while others treat it as intentional murder, but either way, the outcome was the same. In Pakistan, Suleiman has been presumed dead since Aafia's arrest, though he is still considered missing by the US, and no official explanation has been given for what happened to him. That man. I don't care if these people are terrorists or not. Their kids are kids. In fact, no official explanation has really been given by the United States what happened to Aafia or her 3 children for that entire 5-year period. It's believed that she went underground, possibly continuing to work with the Al-Qaeda cell that KSM had created in Karachi, but no specifics are really known. And this is certainly possible. Several people in her orbit had been arrested and sent to Guantanamo, so the idea that she would deliberately make herself disappear is totally reasonable. It also seems strange that in May 2004, over a year after her disappearance, that the Attorney General John Ashcroft would have named Aafia as one of the 7 most wanted Al-Qaeda fugitives in the world, and as a clear and present danger to the US if she was already in custody. If she was in secret custody, then I'd understand leaving her wanted posters up or whatever, but specifically naming her as one of the 7 most wanted at a press conference would be a little strange if they had already spent a year torturing her. I mean, unless they just really wanted to spin the story that they don't have her. As far as I can tell, there is only one specific event during that 5-year disappearance where the US claims to know where Aafia was. She had left her parents' house in March 2003 to go and visit her uncle in Islamabad, and just like your father who said he was only going out for a pack of smokes, she finally showed back up 5 years later. Fucking hell. In a signed affidavit, Aafia's uncle stated that she claimed to have been held captive by Pakistani agencies, and she wanted his help traveling to Afghanistan, where she thought she would be safe. Her uncle had worked in Afghanistan 2 decades prior, and apparently had some sort of connection with the Taliban back then, which is why she thought that she would be safer there. But her uncle said that he wasn't in touch with any of those people anymore. He also told US authorities that Aafia's mother came the next day to see her daughter, and that 2 days later, everyone had left. Really, it's hard to know exactly what was happening during those 5 years, and which stories are true and which are lies. It feels like none of this is true. It all just feels way too vague, and yeah, we just don't know. But once those 5 years were up and Aafia was extradited to the United States, it was time for a trial, which was both mysterious and also a bit of a shit show. Trial and conviction. The very existence of this trial is often seen as bizarre, and in some ways it is. However, there's only one question that is frequently brought up that I can give an easy answer to. Aafia was charged with attempted murder and lesser gun-related crimes, but none of the charges in any way related to terrorism. If what she was accused of was a violent crime, but not an act of terrorism, then why would she be tried in the United States instead of being tried in Afghanistan, where the crime took place? Yes. Wait, what? Like, if she killed an American in Afghanistan, that is Afghanistan's jurisdiction. Why would America get involved? It's just because it's one of their citizens. That's not how law works, right? I'm not certain about that, but I think. This is a reasonable question, as crimes are typically tried in the jurisdiction in which they occurred. Okay. However, Aafia's crime fell under 18 USC subsection 1114, which relates specifically to attempts to kill officers or employees of the United States while performing their official duties. This statute specifies there is extraterritorial jurisdiction over these specific crimes, meaning that the US has jurisdiction to try these crimes no matter where in the world they take place. I mean, according to the US. It's like a famous thing in the UK legal system, in first-year law school, is Parliament's power, UK Parliament's power, is technically unlimited. If Parliament, and the example they always give, is wanted to make smoking, if British Parliament wanted to make smoking illegal on the streets of Washington, D.C., they could pass a law to that effect. Does it do anything? Obviously not, because America's going to be like, you what? No. So they can have this thing which says it applies elsewhere, but the country where it happens has to play ball because it's their territory. However, the US is very powerful, so they could be like, you better do this or we're going to fuck you right up. And you'd be like, okay, America, sorry. Note that any claims of extraterritorial jurisdiction require consent of the other government involved, there we go, unless you plan to go and bring the accused back to your territory by force. And yeah, countries don't really like other law enforcement agencies operating in their borders because it's rightly seen as massive fucking overreach. But the better question was why Aafia was being charged through the US court system at all. She was alleged to have been an Al-Qaeda operative and had been labeled as one of the 7 most dangerous fugitives in the world. Why wasn't she sent to Guantanamo as an enemy combatant like the other suspected terrorists? And why was she only being charged with attempted murder while she was in custody rather than for terrorist activities? The most common claim I've seen related to this was that it was easier this way. Attempted murder is a straightforward charge, and the only evidence they would need would be the events of the date in question. But they don't have evidence, they just have eyewitness testimony from biased parties. To bring charges of terrorism in a jury trial would open a whole can of worms related to classified government information and military secrets and stuff. For the sake of ease and expediency, just charging her with attempted murder would be the best course of action. Yeah, they're Al Caponing her. They're finding the easier charge because they can't do the other stuff for whatever reason. And while that's certainly true, I think it makes the false assumption that the authorities would care about expediency. There are currently 15 prisoners in Guantanamo, and only 2 of them have been convicted of anything. 6 of them haven't even been charged with a crime yet, so it's fair to say that the US wasn't overly concerned with giving terrorists a speedy trial. No. Guantanamo is kind of an affront to the Constitution, isn't it? Like due trial, speedy process, this kind of stuff. I don't know American law, but that is really shady. However, by 2008, public opinion was already turning against the use of Guantanamo. People weren't thrilled about all the alleged torture and human rights violations that were said to be taking place there, so sending new prisoners would have been political suicide. Obama had even made closing Guantanamo part of his campaign platform in 2008. It's nearly 20 years later! Not that he actually did it, but it shows that Guantanamo's still open, right? Yeah, I mean, there's prisoners held there right now. There are currently 15 prisoners in Guantanamo. Holy shit, Obama wanted to do it in 2008, and here we are, 2025. But it shows that people weren't overly enthusiastic about the prospect of sending more people there. There was also the fact that Aafia was a woman. Guantanamo had only ever held men, and sending a Muslim woman there might have played directly into jihadist propaganda. This would have further strained the already deteriorating relations between the US and Pakistan, as the government of Pakistan began demanding Aafia's release as soon as she was extradited to the US. Well, why'd you let her get extradited then? If you're unhappy with her facing the music in the US court system, don't extradite her, you don't have to. Even if you've got an extradition treaty, you can still say no, it's your country. But perhaps the most important detail was that Aafia was a mother, and not just any mother, she was the mother of 2 US citizens, Ahmed and Mariam. Guantanamo was because if you're born there, you automatically get citizenship, which is a strange law. So if you're on holiday and you're pregnant and you have a baby in America, that baby has a right to get American citizenship, which seems so strange. Why there's a word for this. It's not birthright or something, is it? There's something like that. There's some phrase for this. Guantanamo was specifically designated for enemy combatants, and no US citizen had ever been held there. Aafia wasn't a citizen herself, but the fact that her children were could create a potential boondoggle that was best to avoid. As for the trial itself, it was a disaster before it even began. Before anything could begin, Aafia needed a medical and psychological exam to make sure her gunshots had been properly treated. Oh right, she was shot in the tummy. Right, and to determine if she was fit to stand trial. This caused a large delay as Aafia underwent multiple psych evals. The first said she had depressive psychosis, and a second said that she wasn't fit to stand trial, though the latter then reversed her decision and said Aafia was faking it. 4 more psychiatrists were brought in to evaluate her, and 3 of them agreed that Aafia was attempting to fake signs of mental illness. One also noted that any claims of Aafia having been imprisoned and tortured were almost certainly lies. KSM, who was famously waterboarded 183 times, gave detailed and elaborate descriptions of all of the torture he suffered. Also, as military personnel were quick to clarify, that 183 number means that KSM was subject to 183 pours of water over the course of his waterboarding sessions, and that he was only waterboarded on 5 distinct occasions. I don't want to say that makes a difference, but it obviously makes a difference. 183? That's you'd be waterboarded every day for what? Half a year? That's intense. Whereas 5 sessions, I'm sure it's intense. I'm not saying waterboarding isn't torture. I'm not saying it's not horrible, but there's a big difference between when someone says 183 times, you think 183 sessions, not 183 pours. But the point is that he and other people who had been held and tortured at CIA black sites had pretty vivid descriptions of what happened to them. Despite claiming to have endured the same sorts of treatments, Aafia never gave a clear account of torture or imprisonment to any of her psychiatrists, family members, or Pakistani officials. With Aafia declared competent and the trial set to commence, the Pakistani embassy hired a team of 3 lawyers to defend Aafia, but she refused to cooperate with them because they were Jewish. She then tried to have them dismissed on those grounds. So why would you like a news out? Well, he's a Jew! It's like they all are! That's okay, because being a lawyer is impressive. Right? Oh, sorry, I'm stereotyping. They even tried to have them dismissed on those grounds while also claiming that the entire trial was a Jewish conspiracy. and that all potential jurors should be DNA tested to ensure that no Jews were allowed to serve on the jury. She stated, "They should be excluded if you want the trial to be fair." Fuck off. That's not a great start, but at least her lawyers had something to work with, even if they didn't have someone who wanted to work with them. As I mentioned earlier, there wasn't really any physical evidence of what happened. There was no gunshot residue, no fingerprints on the gun, and no evidence that the gun was even fired. Furthermore, this dangerous terrorist who had taken firearms courses while in college in Boston allegedly got her hands on a gun and opened fire on US officials, yet the only person who got shot was her. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Do I buy that she's, involved in terrorism? Kinda hell yeah, I do. But do I think she did this? No, there's no evidence. Given the lack of physical evidence, the prosecution's evidence came in the form of eyewitness testimony from 9 different witnesses. Some of the accounts contradicted one another. It's eyewitness testimony. Can we please stop holding this up on some pedestal as important or relevant? I mean, maybe a tiny bit, but it's kind of rubbish. When something potentially traumatic, like a gunfight, happens really quickly, it can be easy to lose track of the finer details in the heat of the moment while your adrenaline is pumping. But the witnesses didn't even agree on really basic shit, like how many people were in the room. Now, I can't say which way the jury was leaning at that point, but they certainly would have had something to deliberate about. Of course, it didn't help that Aafia kept having to be removed from the courtroom for interrupting and yelling at witnesses. Thanks to her frequent interruptions, she may have spent as much time watching her trial on a CCTV monitor inside a courthouse holding cell as she did in the courtroom. As bad as that was, though, it got even worse when, against the advice of her Jewish lawyers with whom she refused to cooperate, she insisted on taking the stand herself. Not only did she do little to make a case for herself, but according to a journalist who was present at the trial, Aafia kept, quote, avoiding the question of where she'd been for the last 5 years. If she had actually spent 5 years being tortured in a secret prison, convincing the jury of that seemed like something that would have been in her best interest, not something she would avoid getting on the record. Right? Oh yes. And remember the bag Aafia was found with when she was arrested that contained potential bomb-making materials as well as plans for bombs, chemical weapons, and possible locations to attack? When asked about that on the stand by the prosecutors, Aafia claimed that the bag wasn't hers and had been given to her. When reminded that the bag contained literally hundreds of pages of notes in her handwriting. Really? Aafia claimed in an unconvincing tone that she had been forced to copy them down to save her children from torture. So at least one of those two contradictory statements had to have been a lie, and lying under oath while on trial for attempted murder is not going to endear you to a jury. On February the 3rd, 2010, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Aafia guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder, 3 counts of an assault on US officers and employees, armed assault, and using and carrying a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence. Another extremely specific crime. Intent on both continuing to disrupt the proceedings and blaming everything on the Jews, Aafia replied to the verdict by yelling, "This is a verdict coming from Israel, not America. That's where the anger belongs." Alright, why are you so... Okay, I don't know. She repeated that statement 7 months later when her sentencing hearing finally took place. For her crimes, Aafia was sentenced to 86 years in prison, which honestly feels like an insane sentence. It does. But they're Al Caponing her, you know? Many people believe that the incredibly long sentence was to punish her for her alleged Al-Qaeda ties without actually putting her on trial for them. Indeed. And on first glance, that seems plausible. The idea that you get 86 years in prison for attempted murder is as ludicrous as Robert Underdunk Terwilliger winning a Nobel Prize for attempted chemistry. Oh, Kevin, it's a reference I don't get. Who's that?
You can't handle the truth. No truth handler, you. Bah, I deride your truth-handling abilities. Will you get to the point?
But something you need to remember, and something which Simon and others outside the United States are pretty well aware of, is that our justice system is insane and has incomprehensibly long sentences. Aafia was facing up to 8 years each for the 3 assault charges and up to 20 years each for the armed assault charge and the 2 counts of attempted murder. If she was given the maximum sentence for each count, then they were ordered to be served consecutively. That's already 76 years. We have federal sentencing guidelines though, so even as severe as these charges were, a woman with no prior convictions is unlikely that she's going to be given the maximum sentence. However, that still left the overly specific firearm charge, which had a minimum mandatory sentence of 30 years and a maximum sentence of life. A minimum mandatory sentence. God damn, 30 years? The prosecution was seeking a life sentence, but the jury had advised against this on the basis that Aafia's acts were opportunistic rather than premeditated. Realistically, there probably isn't much difference between 86 years and a life sentence though, so it doesn't matter. But at the very least, we can get an idea of where that number comes from, even if Simon and our European friends find our sentencing guidelines to be equal parts arbitrary and draconian. Yeah, I'm just very confused by it all, because sometimes you'll be like, wait, they only got like 6 months in prison and they did this? And then other times it'll be like, oh no, they got the death penalty. Okay. But aside from making sure to turn to the spectators in the courtroom to blame her sentence on the Jews, Aafia was much more calm than she had been during the trial. She told the court, I'm Muslim, but I do love America too. I do not want any bloodshed. I really want to make peace and end the wars. She also forgave both the man who shot her and the judge and presumably jury who convicted her. Not looking for your forgiveness though, as well as indicating a lack of desire to seek an appeal. Aafia was originally incarcerated in Brooklyn before being moved to the Federal Medical Facility in Carswell, Texas, a prison for female inmates with special medical and mental health needs. In September 2024, her lawyer, Clive Smith, who has a long history appealing death penalty cases and aiding detainees at Guantanamo, filed a lawsuit alleging that Aafia had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and denied medical treatment while at FMC Carswell. I mean, yeah, but it's prison. Beatings, sexual assault, well, denied medical treatment, that sounds like it's on the state, but like, it's prison. Wrap up. So, we have 2 stories regarding Aafia, particularly surrounding her 5-year disappearance. I don't think Pakistan has denied Aafia's involvement in activism with groups tied to Al-Qaeda, particularly because there's a lot of proof of that stuff, but they don't mention it either. Instead, they portray her as an innocent neuroscientist and child educator who was kidnapped, tortured, and falsely imprisoned because reasons. Seriously, I watched a lot of interviews and documentaries involving Fauzia, Clive, and Yvonne, but they don't really seem to put forth an explanation as to why the US would have targeted her, other than the claim that KSM said a prayer that happened to include her first name. The United States, on the other hand, had substantial evidence that she was at least tangentially connected to Al-Qaeda and known terrorists, which is why she was wanted for questioning. And that's actually an interesting part of her inclusion in the 7 Most Wanted press conference. There weren't specific terrorist allegations laid against Aafia, they just wanted to talk to her about some stuff.
So, do you like stuff?
The biggest mystery is what happened during her 5-year disappearance, and unfortunately there doesn't seem to be much evidence regarding her whereabouts or activities during that time period at all. The lack of evidence could be used to support either story, that she was a ghost prisoner in Bagram, or that she had gone underground to flee from the FBI and aid Al-Qaeda, as neither circumstance would have left a paper trail. But I'll come back to that in a minute. Personally, I'm inclined to believe the United States' official version of the story, at least up until she was arrested. It is likely that through her activism work, she became more radicalized by other members of the group and potentially was involved in trying to facilitate Al-Qaeda's plans. At the very least, it seems possible that she would have become privy to certain plans and didn't attempt to stop them or warn authorities. That said, I don't think there's any evidence of her direct involvement in terrorist activities beyond facilitating the plans of others. Take the P.O. Box in Maryland, for example. Aafia was intelligent and highly educated, but her biggest asset was that she lived in the US for a decade. Not only could she travel freely, but she knew how things worked. She could do seemingly mundane things like open a P.O. box or rent an apartment with ease because of her years living there. Stuff like that may seem straightforward, but the process of renting an apartment in Pakistan is remarkably informal compared to what we're used to here. There are usually no credit checks, background checks, or employment verification, and lease agreements are often informal and handwritten. I mean, yeah, I know, for rental, I don't think I've ever had a credit check, a background check, or employment verification, because I'm not employed. But no, this doesn't happen as far as I'm aware in Europe. But the contracts are usually not handwritten. Compared to that, renting an apartment in the US is a nightmare of bureaucracy and paperwork that can be difficult for people to navigate if they're unfamiliar with the process. Such difficulty and confusion could result in suspicion, so having someone like Aafia who could navigate these tasks would have been really useful. But once Aafia was arrested, I'm a little less sure what to believe, and this may be a circumstance where the truth is somewhere in between the different versions of events that have been claimed. I find it difficult to believe that a soldier would put their gun on the floor and that Aafia would have grabbed it and opened fire while yelling death to America. But I also find it hard to believe that a soldier would shoot an unarmed woman who was already in custody, even if she wasn't restrained, without some sort of provocation. Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't think either of these scenarios are true. It's probably something in the middle. Maybe if the room was filled with a dozen private piles, that might have happened, but this was a high-value target who was being met by FBI agents and an army captain. It seems unlikely anyone involved in the arrest would have been so inexperienced or trigger-happy. Maybe you have some more concrete thoughts on this than I do, Simon. All I can say is that there probably was some sort of provocation, but I doubt she actually grabbed and fired the warrant officer's gun. Yeah, no, I don't believe that. I think that's silly. There's also no evidence for it other than eyewitness testimony, which is unreliable and biased in this case. So no, I don't think that's what happened, but I also don't think there was just zero provocation either. I don't think either of these scenarios happened. Alright, getting back to the 5-year disappearance, there are a couple of pieces of evidence I haven't mentioned yet that I think really support the idea she was in hiding rather than in secret prison. Well, she never was like, I was being tortured. She never said that. The first of these came in 2010, and it was major news at the time. In fact, there was so much news when it happened that Aafia's name wouldn't have come up in any of the reporting at the time. If you haven't figured it out yet, and why would you have based on that, I'm of course talking about the February 2010 dump of hundreds of thousands of secret diplomatic cables transmitted between the US State Department and 274 of its consulates, embassies, and diplomatic missions around the world. Oh, I do remember that. That was a long time ago now. This was the first major WikiLeaks dump, and it shook the world. Not only did these leaks harm national security by revealing a lot of international strategy and the like, but it also showcased human rights violations by the US, particularly as it pertained to reckless disregard for civilian casualties. However, buried amongst all these state secrets were some memos to and from the US Embassy in Islamabad. The memos were basically the embassy asking, hey, do you guys have Aafia Siddiqui at a secret prison in Bagram? With the reply of essentially, no man, she ain't ever been here. I know some people are generally disinclined to believe anything that the government says. I mean, yeah, but they think these are secret. They think this is a diplomatic cable. But don't forget, these were secret government communications that were never supposed to see the light of day, buried under a pile of revelations about things that the government was doing that people really wish they weren't. It seems unlikely, though admittedly not impossible, that they would have been lying here. The other bit of evidence came from statements Yvonne Ridley made in a 2022 documentary about Aafia. Allegedly, at some point in the 2010s, she was attempting to negotiate a prisoner exchange between the United States and the Taliban. She was attempting. Oh, okay. I keep putting Yvonne in Aafia's shoes. I was like, why is this journalist negotiating a prisoner exchange? I had no idea this. Wait, he's the journalist. I had no idea this was the sort of thing journalists are supposed to do, but whatever. What are you doing? What's going on, Yvonne? Who are you? What's going on in your life? Yvonne was attempting to work out a trade of Aafia for Bowie Bergdahl, an army soldier who was being held captive by the Taliban. According to Yvonne, not only was the United States more than willing to trade Aafia for the American soldier, but they were even willing to throw in a presidential pardon too. She claimed that the US said Aafia wasn't important and was of no value to them, so the pardon wouldn't be a big deal at all. However, Yvonne claimed that the deal fell apart when... She's also British! What are you up to, Yvonne? Claimed that the deal fell apart when Pakistan's inter-services intelligence found out what was being planned. Allegedly, the ISI told the Taliban that if they went through with the exchange, the ISI would pull all of its support from the Taliban. She also claimed that the ISI told her that Aafia was returned to Pakistan and should be dead within 48 hours. The implication of all of this is that even if Aafia wasn't worth anything to the US as a prisoner, she was invaluable to the ISI as one. Whenever they wanted to rile up the Pakistani people with anti-American sentiment, all they had to do was bring up their beloved Aafia, who had been tortured, kidnapped, and was serving an unjust sentence in US prison. But if she was actually returned home, she'd be useless. If you recall, Yvonne was, and still very much is, of the belief that Aafia had been held in Bagram for 5 years. However, this story of hers, which admittedly there's no evidence of beyond her word, seems to undermine this claim. If she was a valuable asset, the kind that would have been held at a secret prison full of terrorists for 5 years, then of course the ISI would have wanted her back. But the story makes it sound as if the US believed, after interrogating Aafia, that she was just a woman who was associated with the wrong people, yet she ultimately knew nothing of value. If that was true, then of course the ISI would want her to remain in US custody, and they would want to perpetuate the myth that she had been kept prisoner in Bagram for 5 years. Or maybe I'm overthinking a story that never happened. Do you think we'll find out someday? Because it's all just very unknown, isn't it? We didn't decode it at all, Kevin. Since the only evidence is the account of a journalist who is extraordinarily biased on this matter, in our opinion. So what do you think, Simon? Was Aafia an unrepentant terrorist, a victim of American injustice, or an at least somewhat innocent person who fell in with the wrong crowd and was deemed guilty by association? I think no. Unrepentant terrorist. I don't think she was a terrorist. I think she was like a tangential terrorism supporter. A victim of American injustice. I mean, depends on how you want to look at it, but yes. Or at least a somewhat innocent person who fell in with the wrong crowd and was deemed guilty by association. No, I think she very much chose to be in that crowd. I'm inclined to believe that it's the third option. I mean, yes, but she chose that crowd. Though it's hard to be sure. There's only one thing I'm positive about, which is that I'm not a real journalist. Please, Simon, don't send me to negotiate with the Taliban. Yes, because that's what journalists do. If you're Yvonne. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you like the show. If you do, why not leave it a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, whatever. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there. Subscribe, make sure you like, and I'll see you in the next one. Particularly because there's a lot of proof